The Collector of Sounds, A Quiet Museum. Chapter 1, The Whispering Jar. I don't remember the first sound I ever collected. Maybe it was the rustling of pages in a forgotten library, or the gentle hum of a lantern at dusk. What I do remember is this: I have always listened more than I've spoken. And in the quiet between moments, I began to hear things others didn't. I travel light. One small leather satchel, a pencil, a journal worn soft with time, and, of course, my jars. Each one is different, some tall and thin like reeds, others squat and round like river stones. Glass, clay, even paper sometimes. They're not meant to hold things you can touch. They hold echoes, hints, murmurs. My journey began long ago, though the calendar means little to me now. I walked away from the city where machines roared and voices piled atop each other like waves in a storm. I stepped into quieter places, where time stretches out like a cat in a patch of sunlight. I went looking for the kinds of sounds that hide when the world gets too loud. One morning, just past dawn, I arrived at a field where tall grass shimmered like sea foam. The wind moved lazily, brushing the stalks with fingers made of air. I sat down cross-legged in the middle of it all, closed my eyes, and waited. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Not a word, not quite. It was the sort of sound a blade of grass might make when telling a secret to the breeze. I reached into my satchel, pulled out a small, round jar with a silver lid, and opened it. I tilted it gently toward the sound and let it drift inside. The moment it settled, the jar glowed faintly, like it had swallowed a firefly. I labeled it, Field Wind, South Slope, Early Spring. I always write them down. Not just what the sound is, but where I found it, how it felt. What kind of sky it lived under. Because sounds aren't just noises. They're memories. That night, I made camp beneath a crooked tree that leaned toward the stars. The fire crackled low, and I opened the whispering jar just a little. The breeze from the field returned, soft and warm, brushing against my cheek like a sleeping cat's tail. I smiled. Some people collect stamps, or coins, or pressed flowers. I collect moments. In the morning, I walked east, following the sun's slow climb. My boots sank slightly into the moss that covered the forest path. Everything smelled green. I passed a stream gurgling like it had a joke to tell but wasn't in a hurry to explain the punchline. That one would be for later. There was a small village on the edge of the woods. I stopped for tea at a quiet inn, where the owner wore slippers too big for his feet and served chamomile in mismatched cups. The clink of porcelain, the soft scrape of chair legs, the sigh someone makes just before sipping, that's where I found the next one. I asked politely, of course. Would you mind if I kept that sound? I said to the room. No one answered. But the quiet gave me permission. I opened another jar, blue glass with tiny swirls, and captured the sigh. It swirled inside like smoke. I could almost see the warmth of the tea in it, the comfort of early afternoon and a nap just beyond the horizon. That one I labeled, inside, near East Forest, cloudy sky. After that, I wandered along the riverbank, listening. There were frogs, and the occasional bird call, but what drew me in was the laughter. Not loud laughter, not the kind that echoes in your chest. This was distant, delicate. The laughter of children playing a game with no rules, their voices bouncing between rocks like tiny skipping stones. I didn't want to take it all. Just a moment. Just enough. So I chose a bottle with a cork and carefully opened it. The laughter slipped in like sunlight through curtains. It sparkled, then settled. I sealed it gently. Children's laughter, river bend, late afternoon. You might ask what I plan to do with all these sounds. Why I carry them from town to town, from forest to field. The answer is simple, and also not. One day, I will build a museum. Not one made of bricks and signs, but of silence and memory. A place only those who truly listen can find. You won't see it unless you're not looking. But if you stumble upon it, perhaps on a rainy afternoon or a windless morning, the door will be open. Inside, you'll hear them all. Not all at once, of course. That would be too much. But in corners and hallways, beside invisible windows and under soft arches of sound, you'll find them waiting. The sigh of the innkeeper. The breeze from the field. A single note of laughter. And maybe, if you listen long enough, you'll find your own sound there too. A breath you didn't know you left behind. Chapter 2, The Echo Between Stones. There's a place where the stones hum. Not in the way machines hum, with purpose and repetition, but in a more ancient sense, like they're remembering. The rocks there are old, older than the language I think in, and somehow they remember things the world has forgotten. Footsteps. Prayers. Raindrops from 1,000 seasons ago. I found this place on the 4th day of walking through a narrow valley where the path narrowed into silence. The air was cool and still, and every sound seemed to stretch before dissolving into nothing. My boots scraped against pebbles, and I could hear each tiny stone roll and settle again. I moved slowly, like I was stepping on a sleeping memory. It was here I heard the echo. I had stopped to rest on a flat boulder warmed faintly by the early sun, when I noticed it, a sound, faint and breath-like, bouncing softly between two tall stones ahead. It wasn't a voice, not quite. More like the ghost of one. I stood and walked toward it, placing each foot carefully, respectfully. The stones were smooth and gray, shaped not by hands but by time itself. They stood close, perhaps only an arm's reach apart. And between them, in that narrow space, was where the echo lived. It came and went like a tide, not repeating my movements, not copying me, but remembering something else entirely. Something before me. I took a jar from my satchel. This one was small and delicate, made from thin porcelain etched with waves. I held it up to the space between the stones and waited. I didn't try to catch the sound right away. I let it come on its own. It did. A soft tone, like a forgotten name, floated into the jar. I sealed it slowly, holding my breath as if I might scare it away. Stone echo, valley narrow, morning light. As I walked on, I found myself thinking about the kinds of sounds we leave behind without meaning to. A last word. A parting laugh. The rhythm of footsteps on a wooden floor you won't walk again. Maybe that's what the stones were remembering. The path curved upward, becoming steeper, lined with moss and ferns. I paused beside a trickling stream that whispered secrets in syllables I couldn't quite understand. It seemed to change its voice every few minutes, as if deciding which memory it wanted to share next. I didn't bottle it just yet. Sometimes, I simply listen. Further on, I reached a clearing where someone long ago must have built something, a low wall of stones, perhaps once a home, now surrendered to the forest. Ivy curled over every surface, and a tree had grown where the roof might have been. There, I heard a song. Not from a person, but from the wind weaving through the gaps in the old stone wall. The notes rose and fell, like the breath of someone humming without knowing they were doing it. I sat among the ruins, still, open. Then, I found the right jar. It was shaped like a bell, made from glass so thin I was afraid to breathe near it. I opened it with care, and the wind song slipped in like a lullaby. It didn't rush or hide. It just came. As though it knew it had been waiting for this. Wall lullaby, Ivy Place, late morning. By noon, the sky was a soft gray. The kind of sky that doesn't press down but floats gently above, like a wool blanket. I wandered into a grove of whispering pines. They weren't whispering to me, of course. They had their own language, and I was just a visitor. But I listened anyway. Sometimes I think the world speaks to those who listen without expecting answers. That's what I've found, anyway. As I walked beneath the green canopy, a single cone dropped from above and landed at my feet with a soft thud. It made no sound worth bottling. But somehow, it felt like a greeting. So I bowed slightly, murmured thanks, and continued. There was a sound I had been chasing for years, the rustle of an old letter being opened for the first time in a century. I'd only ever heard it once, in a dream, but I remembered it clearly. Paper so thin it held its own breath, torn delicately by anticipation. I came close in an abandoned train station further down the path. The station was only bones now, 2 wooden benches, 1 rail sinking into moss, and a rusted sign that read Mirth Bridge, though the last few letters had faded. The wind moved through the beams and broken window frames in long sighs. And there it was. The rustle. It came from a crumpled page caught in a crack of the bench. I reached out, barely touching it, and the sound unspooled, faint, fragile, sacred. I opened a jar lined with velvet inside, one I reserved for things that might fall apart. The sound entered like it had been waiting for me. Page rustle, Mirth Bridge Station, forgotten time. That night, I made camp in the waiting room. No roof, but the stars were enough. I sat by a low flame and opened the echo jar from earlier, the one between the stones. A faint hum filled the air, the kind you feel in your ribs rather than hear in your ears. I closed my eyes and let it settle over me like a blanket made of sound. There is no loneliness in these moments. Only stillness. And in stillness, everything breathes. Chapter 3, The Voice Beneath the Water. There is a lake I visit whenever I feel the need to remember something I've never known. It lies at the edge of a forgotten forest, where the trees lean in toward the water like listeners gathering around a whisper. The surface is almost always still, so still, in fact, that clouds seem reluctant to move above it. It's not a large lake, but it is deep, deeper than its reflection suggests. And it hums. Not loudly, not constantly, but just enough for the world to pause around it. The first time I came here, I thought the water was silent. But silence can be deceiving. You must listen longer, more gently, as though you're letting the sound come to you rather than reaching for it. It was on the third visit that I finally heard it, the voice beneath the water. It didn't sound like a person. Not exactly. More like an echo of a memory. It was smooth and layered, like an old song humming itself through ripples. There were no words, just feeling. A tone that settled in the chest and lingered, like the moment between inhale and exhale. That day, I sat at the edge of the lake for hours. I took off my boots and let my feet rest in the cool water. The mud curled around my toes, and the earth seemed to breathe along with me. When the voice came again, I didn't reach for a jar right away. Instead, I closed my eyes. The sound rose up, not from the lake itself, but from beneath it, deep within, as if 1,000 years of forgotten stories were telling themselves slowly, patiently, in tones too low to startle. It was a kind sound. The sort of voice you imagine reading to you before sleep, steady and warm. I opened a jar I had saved for something exactly like this. It was shaped like a teardrop and made of translucent green glass, like the surface of water under moonlight. I held it close to the lake and whispered, "You can rest here." The sound entered gently, barely stirring the air. The jar grew cool in my hands. I wrapped it in soft linen and placed it deep in my satchel. Lake voice, northern shore, third visit. After that, I stayed a while longer. Not to listen this time, but just to be. Sometimes, being still is the best way to understand. I wandered around the shore in slow steps. Pebbles clicked beneath my feet, each step a small note in a melody of movement. There were dragonflies skimming the surface, their wings making the faintest hum, a sound so light, I wondered if even the lake noticed. Later that afternoon, I followed a narrow stream that trickled out from the lake's eastern end. It danced over stones, ducked under fallen logs, and glimmered between reeds. I followed it as one might follow a daydream, softly and without demand. Eventually, I came to a small pool where the stream paused, collecting itself in a mirror of quiet. And in that pool, something rare happened. I heard laughter. Not from a person, not from a bird, but from the water itself. It was a series of tiny bubbles that popped in quick succession, so delicate, so cheerful, it sounded like the water was chuckling to itself. Perhaps it had remembered something amusing, some trick of sunlight or the way a leaf fell just right. I smiled, and with a light heart, opened a jar that felt like it had been waiting for joy. This one had a cork sealed with wax, and a ribbon tied around its neck. I dipped it close to the pool's edge, and the laughter rose up and settled in, like a giggle curling into a yawn. Water laughter, stream pool, mid-afternoon. As twilight approached, the stream led me to a glade where ferns grew in spirals and the light came through the trees in long golden beams. It was the kind of light that feels like it's been traveling for years just to find you. I didn't collect anything there. I just listened. Sometimes, listening is more than enough. That night, I camped beneath an arched willow whose branches swayed even when the air was still. I lit a small fire, careful to feed it only what it needed. Then I unwrapped the teardrop jar and opened it slowly, letting the voice beneath the water fill the space around me. It was soft, melodic, almost a hum, almost a breath. I sat beside it, letting it roll over my shoulders and settle into the folds of my coat. There's something deeply comforting about knowing that the world holds songs you'll never fully hear. That no matter how many sounds you collect, there are always more waiting, gently hidden, patiently humming their stories beneath surfaces and shadows. I looked up at the stars, and for a moment, I thought I could hear them, too. But I didn't reach for another jar. I just listened. Chapter 4: The Room Where Rain Waits. Somewhere between the folds of a forgotten map, there is a house that doesn't appear on any road. It isn't hidden, exactly. It simply exists in the kind of place people walk past without seeing. The kind of place you only find when you're not trying to. I arrived just as the sky was thinking about rain. The clouds above had darkened into soft slate, but the air was still dry. The wind had quieted, as if listening for the first drop. That's when I saw the house, a two-story cottage with ivy tracing its stone walls, windows like sleepy eyes, and a chimney that exhaled the faintest scent of cedar smoke. The door was open. Not wide, just enough to say, "You may come in, if you wish." And so I did. The floor creaked beneath my boots, not in protest, but as if it were stretching. The air smelled of pages and pine, like a library left to dream. There were no footsteps, no voices. Just the sense that the house itself was listening. Then I heard it. The sound of rain, but not outside. Inside. And yet, nothing was wet. I followed the sound down a hallway lit by a single candle resting on a shelf. The flame didn't flicker. At the end of the corridor was a door, slightly ajar. Beyond it, a small room with no furniture, no windows, and no ceiling, only sky. And in that room, the rain was waiting. I don't mean it was falling. It wasn't. But it was there, present in the hush, in the way the air held its breath. The room was filled with the weight of impending rainfall, the kind that softens the world before it begins. It was like the moment before music, when the conductor raises their hand and silence leans forward to listen. I opened my satchel, and from it I took a jar shaped like a raindrop suspended in time. It was clear, smooth, and cool to the touch. I uncorked it and simply held it open. The sound that entered wasn't a drop, or a storm, or even a drizzle. It was the feeling of rain before it arrives. A hush. A promise. A pause. Rain waiting, sky room, clouded dusk. I closed the jar slowly, with both hands. Outside the house, the world remained dry. But I had carried something inside with me now, something quiet and full. In the room across the hall, I found another kind of sound. There was a clock, though its hands did not move. It ticked anyway, once every so often, with no pattern, like a thought interrupting stillness. Each tick sounded like it might have forgotten what came before it. I didn't bottle that sound. It seemed content just to be. I moved through the rest of the house like a guest in someone else's memory. In the kitchen, a kettle sat on a stove, cold. But the faintest hiss hung in the air, as if it remembered having boiled once. The cupboards were filled with teacups, each a different shape and color. I picked one at random and held it close to my ear. There was something there. A murmur, like the memory of conversations long past. Friends sharing stories, a grandmother humming while stirring honey into chamomile. I chose a jar with a lid shaped like a leaf and held it near the cup. The murmur curled in like steam. Teacup voices, cottage kitchen, pre-rain evening. In the attic, dust covered everything like soft snow. There was an old rocking chair near a round window, and a music box sitting silently on the floor beside it. When I opened the lid, the tune didn't play. But something else did. The silence between the notes. I can't explain it more clearly than that. It was the shape of a melody without sound, the memory of a lullaby. A tune once sung, now resting. I didn't want to disturb it. But I offered my jar anyway. It accepted. Unplayed lullaby, attic corner, candlelight. As I made my way back downstairs, the first real drop of rain tapped against the roof. A soft hello. Then another. Then many. The house welcomed them like an old friend arriving late, but just in time. I stood in the doorway and listened. Not with my ears, but with my chest, my breath, my stillness. Then I opened one last jar. It was ceramic, glazed in stormy blue. I didn't label it right away. Some sounds are better named later, when you've had time to understand them. I left the house just as the rain began in earnest. Each drop played a different note on the leaves, the roof, the path. It was not loud. It was not sharp. It was round, soft-edged, kind. I walked through it slowly, letting it find its place around me. I didn't look back. Some places disappear once you leave them. Not out of cruelty, but out of design. They exist not to be found again, but to be remembered. That night, as I dried by a fire built beneath the overhang of an old bridge, I opened the jar from the sky room and listened to the sound of waiting. It filled the air not with noise, but with stillness. Sometimes, the quietest sounds are the ones that carry the most. Chapter 5: The Sound That Never Leaves. There are sounds that follow you. Not because they wish to haunt, or cling, or trouble, but because they become part of you the moment you hear them. As if, from that instant onward, they live in your breath, your bones, the space behind your eyes when you close them. I didn't expect to find such a sound. I never went looking for it. But then again, most of the sounds I collect find me first. It began in a quiet village near the edge of a hollow, where the hills bent like folded parchment and the trees whispered in accents I'd never heard before. The sky that day was soft gray, a color that always seems to ask permission before it rains. I arrived just as the bells rang. But they weren't church bells. Not the kind that marked the hour or call for prayer. These were deeper, older, with a resonance that stretched the space around them. They rang once, then paused, then rang again, each chime falling into the next like petals drifting into water. I stood still, jar forgotten in my hand, as the sound passed through me. Not over, not around, through. I don't know how long I stood there. When I finally moved, I noticed an old woman watching from her window. Her eyes didn't follow me, but lingered on the sky, as though she too had heard something she couldn't explain. Later, I learned the bells had no tower. No rope, no clapper. They existed only in sound. So I followed them. Past the last of the cottages, past the narrow dirt road lined with stone walls. The bells led me toward a thicket of bare trees, and beyond that, to a clearing where a single stone stood upright in the earth. It wasn't large, just shoulder height, with strange carvings worn almost smooth by wind and time. But from it, I could still hear the echo. A tone that never really stopped, just faded into stillness and then returned again. I took out a jar I had never used. It was simple, clear, heavy, no decoration. I had carried it for years, waiting for something that could not be named. I held it near the stone and whispered, "If you wish to stay, I will keep you safe." The sound entered slowly. Not like water poured, not like wind rushed. It moved with the patience of memory. And as it settled into the jar, I felt something inside me shift, not break, not hurt, but open. Unseen bell, stone circle, time unknown. I stayed by the stone until night arrived, bringing with it a chorus of insects and the far-off rustle of wings. The kind of evening where you feel alone but not lonely. When I returned to the village, I carried the jar with both hands. The sound had changed something in me. I couldn't explain how, only that the air seemed clearer, the ground a little warmer. I imagined the villagers lived their entire lives in the presence of that sound, never speaking of it, only holding it within them like a candle cupped in their palms. The next day, I visited a child who had been drawing in the dirt outside her house. She asked me, "What are you carrying?" I showed her the jar. I didn't open it. She leaned close and listened, as children do, with her whole self. After a long moment, she smiled and said, "It sounds like when someone remembers you." I wrote that down. The next sound I found came while walking along the edge of a wheat field, where the wind was playing games with the stalks. It ran between them, pushing laughter from one to the next like a secret shared among friends. But underneath the laughter was a low, steady hum. A kind of knowing. The sound of something rooted. I took a jar lined with copper, shaped like a bell curve, and held it just above the swaying heads of wheat. The sound climbed in easily, like it had been waiting to be noticed. Field hum, border path, harvest season. That evening, I opened the jar from the stone circle. The bell rang only once. But the sound stayed with me long after the note had faded. It settled into the spaces between thoughts, a quiet companion in the quietest of places. I realized then that it had become more than a sound I collected, it had become a sound I carried. There are some sounds you do not bottle to keep. You bottle them to remember that they've already become part of you. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, I sat by my small fire and listened to nothing. Or maybe everything. Sometimes, I can't tell the difference. But I knew, with a certainty rare in my wandering life, that this sound, the bell, the hum, the silence afterward, would never leave me. Not because I had captured it, but because it had found a home. Chapter 6: The Museum at the Edge of Quiet. It took years to find the place. Not because it was far, or hidden, or surrounded by impossible mountains. But because some places cannot be reached by footsteps alone. You must arrive with intention. Or perhaps, with stillness. I walked until the world began to soften. The sky thinned into mist. The trees, once proud and chattering, now stood still like old friends do when there's nothing left to say. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. I felt it in my chest, the gentle pull, not of a destination, but of a return. And then I saw it. The museum. It wasn't grand, not in the way cathedrals or towers are. It didn't rise from the earth. It rested there. A low building made of wood and glass and air. Its roof sloped like a whisper, and its walls shimmered faintly, as if woven from quiet itself. There was no sign. No name carved above the door. Just a silence that welcomed me. I stepped inside. The air didn't change. It remained exactly as it had outside, calm, feather-light. The floor was polished stone, warm beneath my boots. Light entered through unseen windows, glowing softly across smooth walls lined with niches. And in each niche, a jar. Not just mine. Others. Some I recognized, my own handwriting curled on labels I had written beside campfires, on hilltops, in forgotten stations. Inside. Unplayed lullaby. Rain waiting. But others I had never seen before. Jars made of obsidian, of sea glass, of something like frozen moonlight. each holding its own quiet world. There were sounds I had never heard, the hush of a snowfall falling upward, the last breath of a candle flame, the sound a shadow makes when it returns to your feet. And yet, I felt no envy. Only awe. Awe at the vastness of silence. I walked slowly through the museum, my footsteps muffled, not by design, but by welcome. Every sound I had carried was here. Not trapped, not imprisoned, but resting. At peace. I came to a hallway marked only by a single chime, a soft note that hung in the air without echo. It guided me to a circular chamber at the center of the museum. Here, I saw them. The original jars. Each one placed with reverence on low pedestals. I approached one made of clear glass, its surface etched with wind patterns. Its label read simply, "First Sound." I leaned in and heard something I cannot describe. Not because I don't have the words, but because it wasn't made of words at all. It was the feeling of hearing for the first time. I stayed in that room for hours. Perhaps longer. Time moved differently here, if it moved at all. Eventually, I opened my satchel and removed the last jar I had carried, the one from the stone circle. The bell that never quite left me. I set it gently on an empty pedestal and stood beside it. There was no ceremony. No applause. Only a pause. A pause that felt like gratitude. As I turned to leave, the museum sighed. Not from sorrow. From fullness. It had accepted another voice into its quiet symphony. And I felt, in some wordless way, that I had done what I was meant to do. Outside, the mist had lifted, revealing a sky stitched with soft clouds. I walked a while, though I no longer counted the steps. Somewhere behind me, the museum remained. It would be there for anyone who truly listens, not with their ears, but with their presence. I did not stop collecting. But I collected differently. No longer for jars, but for the quiet between my breaths. For the moments when a sound arrives not to be kept, but to be shared. To be noticed. To be loved. Because sounds, like memories, are not meant to be owned. They are meant to be held, gently, briefly, and then returned to the world.